innovation across Africa's media and communications landscape, all through the massive Edelman Africa network. With a continent as wide and diverse as our own, you need ongoing updates to stay ahead of the game in our industry, which is why we partner with communications and PR experts from across Africa. I'm Shane Garmana, and once again, I'll be your moderator today as we take a look at some of the most pressing conversations happening in some of the fastest growing African comms markets. For those of you who read your invite, we've got a really exciting topic to unpack today, the future of AI and its effect on public relations. AI tools are very quickly transforming the way in which many industries are conducting their business, and the comms sector is no exception. From media monitoring to writing, to brainstorming, to creating new art and inspiring creative campaigns, AI is having a massive impact on the way we do our work, whether we like it or not. As we saw during the mobile tech revolution, Africa is always keen to adopt and adapt new technologies. So with these AI tools being so readily and freely available, it's very likely we're going to see a boom in users across the continent in the coming months and years. But how can these tools be used ethically, effectively, and creatively in the African public relations context? Our experts from the Edelman Africa Partner Network are ready to unpack this question and explain how these new tools are changing ways of working for themselves, their clients, and their nations. And we're very lucky today to have representatives from across Africa. Firstly, we have Kwame Senu, Executive Chairman of the Holding Opinion and Public, based in Cote d'Ivoire, Robert Gituma, Managing Director of Hilaria Consults in Rwanda, and based in South Africa, our very own Mike Wood, Head of Digital at Edelman Africa. We were originally going to have Mildred Kaunda, the founder and principal consultant of Cutting Edge PR in Zambia, but very much like our topic today, she's having some technical difficulties, so please excuse her. Just a quick note for the audience. At the end of the session, we'll be taking some time to answer your questions. So everyone in attendance, please feel free to use that Q&A button below to send us your thoughts and queries to our panelists. So wait, that's more than enough from me. Let's jump right in. Should we start with Robert? Robert, how would you describe the level of adoption of AI tools in Rwanda? And not necessarily in the PR sector, but overall.
Okay, good. So thank you very much, Robert. This is Robert Gituma from Rwanda. So we'll start first of all before we go far with the media landscape in Rwanda. And this is something that is very interesting. And on the screen, as you can see, we have the top news sources, which is Rwanda, which has 60% radio, television 20%, online and social media 18%, while print is 2%. So we can see the dominant source of news here is radio, as well as we have other media establishments. We have categorized them there. And for the top social media platform, Facebook takes the lead. And we also have down on the slide, we have more media establishments in categories. So looking at Rwanda, we are looking at a population of around 3.2 million. This is the latest statistics that we have from the Rwanda census, and around 4.25 million internet users. And for the mobile penetration in Rwanda, it has gone up at 78.8. And again, as we said, radio is the most popular news source. And if we go a bit down for the billboards, which I've seen most of the countries that already have them, but in Rwanda, we took them off the street. So we are kind of encouraging people to do the digital ones, but still the uptake is a bit low. And for the news, which the news about the countries, most of it is dominated by news that are development and of course, accountability and so on. And go to the next slide, please. And this is just a general overview of the population distribution in Rwanda. Of course, we have the females that are, more than the males and so on. So going back to the question that you asked about AI adoption, of course, Rwanda, just like any other country in the world, is looking at AI as the future of its economic policy. However, we are still in the infancy stages. And as many of you may know, Rwanda is, of course, one of the fastest growing nations in terms of ICT. And we have seen this especially during the time of the COVID pandemic, where Rwanda released or launched the AI-powered robots that were, that were dispatched in different areas, especially the points of entry, just to be able to screen people in temperatures and, of course, monitor COVID-19 patients, as well as being a leader in many fronts. The country is still in its early stages of AI adoption, and there are factors that contribute to this. First of all, the first thing would be the high cost of AI. So it's quite expensive, and also the lack of the manpower or the lack of the tech team that is going to, who have the STEM knowledge. But however, the Rwandan government supports this through the private sector forum, as well as the Ministry of ICT, which is government driven. And we have other examples of where AI has been used, especially, for example, in this project of the zip line, where Rwanda was the first country to use drones to deliver blood from, point A to point B. And I just recently checked on the stats, and I saw that it was started very early, actually in 2016, and we can see that Rwanda is on the way, is on the path of adopting AI as one of the economic key drivers.
Thanks, Robert. I mean, you say that it's sort of in the early stages, but it sounds like it's in so many sectors. So maybe let's go through to Kwame. Same question, but would you maybe give us a little bit of a rundown of your sort of comms environment, and then what is the AI adoption like in the Ivory Coast?
Thank you, Shane. I think Côte d'Ivoire sits in Francophone West Africa, and it's still much dominated by TV and radio, because the age of internet is growing, but we're not there yet totally. And you have platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook really leading the conversation. But I think what is important to realize is that the population, the active population, is mostly connected, because you look at the numbers and you have 76% of the people of Côte d'Ivoire below the age of 35. So when you match those numbers with internet penetration and the mobile phone penetration, you can easily realize that the adult, literate, and even illiterate for the mobile phone are all digitally connected, which make it a very much more mature market than some other markets on the continent. But coming to AI, it's the same conversation with Rwanda. We are still developing AI. We are still figuring out what to do with AI. And there was a seminar organized by the ICT minister in Côte d'Ivoire to think about how the government, but also the country as a whole, can adopt AI. But what happened is with technology is that you can't have silos. So AI is already in Côte d'Ivoire. First, you look at security. The government of Côte d'Ivoire is now operating AI-powered camera, able to track and detect infringement to the traffic and road laws, and identify by the plate number who the culprit is. That's one of the usage. Another usage of AI in Côte d'Ivoire, still led by the government, is in agriculture sector. You probably know that if you've drunk chocolate today, there's a chance that it came, the cocoa bean came from Côte d'Ivoire, the world's largest producer of cocoa. But this cocoa production comes sometimes with deforestation. And through AI-powered drone, the government has been monitoring the impact on the environment, the forest, and all that. In healthcare as well, we've seen some adoption of AI around things like cancer detection, etc., etc. So it's pretty much government-led. But in a Francophone culture, there is not much communication from private organization about what they are doing. We do suspect, however, that there is a lot of that happening in the banking sector and in the telecommunication industry. So it's work in progress. The interest is there. Some practical usage are already there. but there is more to do, and there is not yet a policy to say this is where the country is going.
Thanks, Kwame. And of course, Mike, could you maybe give us some of your thoughts on overall adoption of AI in South Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shane. I think just an important note around how we think about AI and the differentiation between AI as we use pretty much every day. I mean, you may not think of it, but you do use it pretty much every day, and generative AI. The distinction really is in normal AI, where AI is programmed to accept a data set and a number of rules, and then to provide you with data based on the inputs from the user, who is all of us. So anything from insights-driven technologies, where we look at Facebook and we get insights about user performance and user behaviors, to things like your chatbot that you may use to chat with your financial advisor, or to order food, or whatever the case is. All of that is AI. The inputs that you give to them are used to analyze a data set, and then you're provided with the outputs that you kind of anticipate. And the new buzzword is obviously generative AI, which is used to create something original or something new. But obviously the data set is far broader, right? So the data set is basically anything that's available in the digital world, online. And so there's a very clear distinction between AI and generative AI. You know, I think in terms of AI, as I say, it has been a progressive adoption in South Africa, to a point where it is in almost everything that we do. I think innovative use of AI is something that's starting to become more prevalent, and it's used across the board. You know, I mean, our financial markets are making huge strides in kind of analyzing the markets to see where the next trends are, and how we kind of tap into those, as well as something as simple as, you know, conservation, using AI in UAVs and drones to recognize what the animal migrations are like, so that we can kind of act to prevent poaching. So AI is pretty much everywhere. And I think that we need to kind of be very clear around how we want to use it, and where are the right places to use AI to kind of push us forward. I think the new space, as I mentioned, in generative AI is very much a gray area, and it's something that there are new innovations coming around every day. And it's a really exciting space to kind of look into and to be a part of. Yeah, and it's something that we need to make sure we're completely educated on.
So, I mean, it sounds like overall, the adoption rate for AI tools is actually growing really quickly. It's accelerating faster than we expect across basically all of your regions. And it also seems like it's quite multi-sectoral. But what about our industry? Kwame, how are these tools kind of being used in PR in your region?
In the region, I'm not sure there's much usage of AI, but as a company, we quickly embrace AI through predictive tools that AI offered, but also through research, because that's one of the gaps we wanted to address. But coming to what Mike said and the generative AI, I think that is where the usage is really a key. What I would call the boring task of researching and putting data together is now really the task of ChatGPT. I don't know if it has become a secret or not, but a lot of people now rely on ChatGPT to perform boring tasks like researching, although there's caution to that. So that's really where it is. I'm not sure that the data sets that the generative AI operates on speak much to my region in terms of images or video, for instance, you know, because you have Black people in this part of the world, but with very specific feature. And I mean, someone from West Africa knows the difference with East Africa, where my brother Robert is, or South Africa. So the data set doesn't allow usage in image and video, but definitely ChatGPT is in the agencies. People use them to generate copies, to test ideas, to write press release and all that. and it is coming to a point where we're seeing the one-man agency, as I call it, thriving now with the help of ChatGPT mainly. There've been some talk around Google Bard as well, but I think ChatGPT is really the one that gained that momentum through its ability to generate a lot of text and help. And we have one use case recently where we had to generate a long report in a very short period of time. And it was really, really interesting to see how it could assist in putting together our idea, of course, with the limitation that is the one of ChatGPT trained on the data it has. And I'm not sure everybody's aware, but the data set is stopping 2021. So you're not always getting up-to-date information.
I think it's really fascinating that you bring up the idea that all of these data sets are so Western-centric. And I think that's something that we have to be so careful of, is that perhaps they can introduce stereotypical thinking into a lot of the work. And it's something that I've noticed personally with ChatGPT. But I think that's a conversation that we'd have to unpack. I think that's an absolutely, that's a topic on its own. But let's maybe just talk a little bit about sort of general use of AI in the PR sector. Robert, what about in Rwanda? What sort of tools are you spotting that are being used in the sector?
Okay, so in our case, just as Kwame has said, the penetration of AI in PR is still low. So I will not say that there is a lot of talk about AI in PR. However, we have used it in monitoring some of the campaigns, and this has been successful because some of the data that we have collected shows us the direction that a lot of the communication that we package has to be done in Kinyarwanda. And Kinyarwanda is the main language in Rwanda. So we have 3 official languages in Rwanda, which is English, French, and Kinyarwanda. However, we realize that all the communications that goes with French and English, we do not get the kind of feedback that we expect or we hope to get. So now that we know that, because we can see the statistics coming back when we are sending communication and so on through AI, and because we are armed with this information, then we can personalize and package the specifics to the market. And one very smart and intelligent communication plan that has been done is, using the integrated AI tools to basically drive the conversations through data analytics. As Kwame said, we still have a lot of use of ChatGPT, but again, it's a bit of westernized way of it, and the feedback mostly is in English and French, and we are not able to use that, especially when you are packaging, because even Kinyarwanda, to translate Kinyarwanda to English, there's no direct translation. It's like, first of all, you have to understand the concept, and then you put it in context, and then you're able to translate it in a way that it can be used. So we still a bit far in terms of getting to that point. However, if you look at the international arena, how Rwanda has positioned itself, looking at the history of Rwanda, and also looking at where Rwanda stands today in terms of it has become a bucket list destination for many people. The reason I would suggest, or I would think, is because AI is also doing its work also on the international arena, and a lot of people are getting to see the good side of Rwanda because the conversation is going on there. And of course, we have these very intelligent tools that are behind this. And of course, there's also the personal, the human touch and the human element who are also talking about this. So basically supplementing what AI can do, and making sure that the conversation gets out well.
I mean, it does sound like the tourism and especially the hospitality industry are going to be really deeply affected by AI, but it's really interesting to hear how sort of your government is leveraging that. Let's go back to Mike. Mike, what's the AI situation like in South Africa's comms sector?
Yeah, so thanks, Shane. I think I think again, it's growing and growing quite aggressively. I think a large challenge that we've had, and it seems a common trend across Africa. And as I've done work throughout Africa over the kind of span of my career, I think access to data is quite a challenge, right? So that data still needs to be physically collected somehow, and finding data that's exclusively pertinent to Africa is a bit of a challenge. I do think that it is growing and it is improving. And I think our ability to interpret that data and develop insights based on that data is really where the value is. So, obviously, it's very much used in gathering sentiment and agenda surfing and all of these really important things for any PR agency to make sure that they are staying ahead of the communications trend and curve. But it is really how well and how much you use these tools to your benefit that's going to kind of form the differentiator between those who are on the cutting edge of making sure that they are using the tools to stay ahead of conversation and stay ahead of trend, and those of us who are just using the tools to kind of, basically do our jobs. I think the risk and obviously the conversation around how we use generative AI is still something that's ongoing, right? As to whether or not we should or could or can be using generative AI in our everyday jobs, I think is still a debate that's happening globally. It's not unique to Africa and unique to various markets. It's really a bit of a question of, yes, we can, but should we, and to what level? And I think the most important part of understanding, whether we should be using an AI tool is to really understand how it works and where that data comes from and where we are kind of pulling these insights from and how that then converts into work that we end up using, and whether we should be using that as a hard and fast kind of resource for information. As with anything, if you plug any search into Google, which in itself is an AI, it may present you with misinformation. And if that misinformation, creeps its way into a report that you've done or into a commentary that you've made using a tool like ChatGPT, that presents a risk to you. So I think as everyone kind of feels their way into this new generative AI space, it's going to be very, very tricky to find exactly the right spaces to utilize the tools. And I think the best way that we can do that is to, for each of us as PR professionals, to become experts in the tools that are available to us.
And I think that point of the spread of misinformation is really important. And I see that specifically in South Africa, Mike, there's been a bit of more of a push towards more organizational monitoring of the use of AI. And there's a new association, I think it's called the SAAI, or the South African Artificial Intelligence Association. Do you think that organizations like these are helping or hindering the adoption of AI and AI-related technology in South Africa?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a gray area, and it links back to kind of the legislative space around AI and generative AI, right? Because obviously AI and generative AI uses a data set that is incredibly broad, and it's everything that's available out on the we'll call it the open market out on the internet. It's very gray in terms of actually who owns that information, right? If it pulls from 80 different resources, who theoretically owns the copyright to that information, which is very difficult to define. And I think broadly speaking, it's something that, again, globally, everyone is faced with this exact same challenge. If you use a generative image generator to produce a new piece of artwork, but that artwork is stealing 5% from this image that it found on the internet, 5% from this image, 5% on this image to create something wholly original. Is it original? And how do we kind of legislate around the usage of that in a space where you're going to end up benefiting monetarily or benefiting even as an agency to create new artwork. So it is a very loose and a very kind of gray area. We're seeing it impact even at the moment, the strikes in Hollywood, where, the threat is, well, we're starting to use AI to generate people's visages and their faces, and do they have any kind of control over that, and how does that impact an industry as a whole going forward, right? So I think that it is something that we sort of do need to start thinking about as businesses, right? So organizations like the SAAI, it's quite a mouthful, but hopefully they are there to encourage the use of AI in the most responsible way possible, right? So from everything that I've read about it, it is kind of pushing into the more positive spaces, driving the embrace of AI technology to do the right things and for the advancement of the technology and not the abuse thereof, which I think is a very important difference between the two, right? Is that we need to make sure that we're pushing always into positive spaces so that we don't end up in a space where a technology that is as powerful as AI gets used for, is not used for good, basically, which could be detrimental to the development and the embracing of AI. Yeah.
So I know we've kind of touched on this now, but we've had such a really good overview of sort of how AI is being used multi-sectorally. But what I'd really like to hear from all of you is, what do you personally think are some of the benefits and potential pitfalls that this sort of technology can introduce? Maybe let's start with Robert. What are your thoughts sort of on the pros and cons of AI, especially in a country like Rwanda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so from the PR perspective, we would have the cliche use of data, say like data analysis and analyzing audience behavior and trends on social platforms, which of course for us as PR professionals, they will help us to tailor communications and, based on this data, as well as maybe identifying leading medias and so on. But Rwanda itself is a small country, so sometimes this kind of information, you might have to build relationships with people so that you're able also to get the accurate information. Just like he has said before, when AI can also, it's not purely controlled in a way that you might get misinformation, and if you use this information, you are not able to have the correct overview of what you're looking for. But in our case, I would say this is a place that we are looking at in, making sure that we enhance it and work on it to make sure that the information that AI gives us back and the information that we use for, in PR and communication is accurate. But also we have another pitfall, and which is a major setback for us. As I said earlier, we have in Kinyarwanda as the main language. And we understand at this point that AI does not understand Kinyarwanda. So, and if it does, we have to find a way to, to feed this information to the systems and to the tools so that you can be able to get accurate information. And because it's the widely spoken main language in communication, and since we are still also in the infancy stage, it will still take some bit of time to make sure that Kinyarwanda is incorporated into the AI tools, and you are able to get the information that you need, and you're also going to get it with accuracy. So for us, language is a major barrier, especially when we want to start, when we want to use AI. And we are still in the process of seeing how we can work with this and make sure that it works for us.
And I think when we spoke about this before, you also mentioned that it's being used to spread fake news and propaganda that often focuses on the country's kind of past. And I mean, unfortunately, I think that this proliferation of fake news probably isn't going to be going away. But it looks like, there are already AI tools that are trying to assist on trying to prevent this, like video authentication tools. But it's quite strange that we're using AI tools to monitor AI tools behaving badly. But Mike, can we move on to you? Same question. What are some of the pitfalls and what are some of the opportunities for AI, especially in SA?
Thanks, Shane. Look, I think the depth of it is, it's like asking how long is a piece of string. I think ultimately the tools that are at our fingertips already, they help us be more efficient and a lot more accurate in terms of interpreting data sets and the kind of trends that are happening online. And it helps us kind of keep our finger on that pulse of communications trends and what is happening out in the market, right? So analyzing any kind of data is no longer a laborious task where we need to generate reports on reports on reports. We can actually just make sure that we're asking the right questions, which I think is a key point in this, right? So we have all of these incredible tools that are able to deliver us data, but it's how we interpret that data, and it's how we ask the questions up front that really deliver us valuable insight, right? And I think the most important part of that is making sure that we understand the reasons why we're asking questions, first of all, so that as we get our data sets from all of these incredible AI tools, that we make sure that we're finding the answers that we were actually looking for, because it's very easy to get lost in the mire. It's a little bit, and as part of a comms agency, it's putting the science behind the magic, right? To make sure that our data is accurate, that we're able to get credible insights from credible sources, which is incredibly important. I've said incredible about 5 times there, but it is incredibly important. I think to Robert's point around misinformation and the spread thereof, it is a major pitfall of AI and the tools that are available to us also being available to anybody who is wanting to spread that misinformation, right? It's even to the point where some governments demand the shutdown of social media around the time of the elections because of the amount of misinformation that gets spread. So that's an incredible risk, I think, to anybody, not necessarily only in the PR space, but also globally. And then I think the biggest risk around AI and generative AI is, the lack of understanding. I think it's incredibly important to understand how that information is gathered, how that information is interpreted, and how those insights are generated, right? And then just every single thing that comes out of an AI generated tool needs to be questioned, needs to be interrogated, and needs to be interpreted, so that we make sure that an insight that we gather out of a report that's generated through an AI tool is interpreted to make sure that we are telling the right stories, that we're hitting the right notes, and that we're not missing an entire information gap, which is very much a risk. Right. Any AI tool is not going to be able to necessarily interpret the data to a point of understanding that a human would at this point. Obviously, as it evolves and as it grows, which it's doing rapidly, that may change in time, but for the time being, it needs to be interpreted.
I do think you're right in that. I suppose what comes out of a generative AI tool is only as good as the person prompting it. But Kwame, do you have anything to add on the pros and cons conversation?
I think the first thing is really, we all know the pro. It helps to be fast. It does some boring tasks, but I would like and be specific to our industry. The number one issue, pitfall I see is the over-reliance on AI, and it's been seen very well in the aviation sector, where over time, as planes got better in doing tasks by themselves, pilots became complacent, and it led to unfortunate situations. So we have to be sure that we are able to work without AI, because as generative AI is doing a lot more than before, agencies and consultants would start relying on them, missing the nuances, because I always say we deal in nuances, and that's what makes our work relevant. One word missing can change the whole statement that we're sending out, or whatever copy we are pushing and all that. The over-reliance. Number two for me is really the data set. And I'm saying that as an African. Africa has always been underrepresented, misrepresented in the global internet. Definitely. The media coverage, the news out there, and it doesn't matter whether it is the Western world, it is the Asia, we know all that, it's documented. So if AI, generative AI, is feeding on this stereotype and all that, it will be leading to issues and especially for, let's say, consultants who are not experienced on the continent. They might start getting information from ChatGPT that are inherently wrong and not accurate without being able to look at that. And the final pitfall I see is really this whole gray area that we've been talking about since the beginning. Do we use it? Do we not use it? How do we use it? Do we disclose to the client? Do we not disclose? Etc. etc. It's the perfect recipe for abuse. And we really need, I think it's a conversation that PR associations are tackling to really regulate, or at least come within ourselves with the AI ethics that we need to follow, because this would lead to many issues if we do not take care of that. And finally, Mike mentioned how misinformation spread. We have a live case scenario where the government of Senegal has banned TikTok because 1 year to the election, there have been 43 people dead because of all the videos and all that. We have currently a coup d'etat in Niger, where the regional bloc ECOWAS, which is the equivalent of SADC for the Southern African part, has issued some decision, but every day you have tons of video created. You can see with artificial intelligence saying that the country attacking each other, they are at war. I mean, it's really where it is going, and it's a pitfall, because now it is giving us PR professional more work. Because imagine you are the communication manager of the ECOWAS and you have to deal with this amount of misinformation that is generated at a speed that no team can compete with. Even if you had 100 people working, you can't just possibly fight it. So it's really something we will have to look at as we manage our client reputation, how we counter the misinformation generated through generative AI.
Kwame, I think you've completely led us beautifully into the next part of this conversation, but I absolutely agree that there has to be some sort of monitoring and reporting process around these the use of these tools. And what I think makes this really important is that we kind of need to discuss regulation and legislation around AI. So maybe let's start with Mike. What's the legislative environment around AI like in SA, and do you think it's going to affect our ability to use these tools?
So at the moment, the legislation around it is an incredibly massive gray area, right? As I mentioned earlier, and I don't think it's exclusive to South Africa. I think globally it's something that people are struggling to kind of get their heads around, how we legislate the use of AI, generative AI, to produce work. I think ultimately that is the biggest question. How do we kind of say what is okay and what is not okay? And even to the point where the question is, well, does this become a self-regulated space, which as human beings, and history will tell us, that's generally not one of our strengths as a generation. I do think, however, that one of the problems with legislation is the technology is going to evolve at a pace that legislation is not going to be able to keep up with. Legislation typically moves slow, and the evolution of this technology is moving on a day-to-day basis. It is evolving and growing and improving. And I do think that big business is going to have to play a major, major role in how the legislative horizon is set. Businesses like Microsoft, like ChatGPT, like all of the Google, are also going to have to play a part in setting the landscape for how generative AI and AI as a whole is kind of legislated, is monitored, is used responsibly, which I think is the big kind of buzzword is responsible usage, and how do we make sure that we're being held accountable for our actions in the space of AI, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do, especially because as AI evolves, to your point earlier around using AI tools to identify AI tools, it's going to be more and more difficult to discern what has been generated and what has been created by a human. So I think it's, as I say, it's going to be something that is evolving and on an ongoing basis, and it's going to be a really incredible evolution to watch and be a part of. But I do think that the key word is responsible usage.
And I think your point around how the technology may outpace the legislation was proven with social media. And only now are we starting to see actual legislation across the world. But hopefully, Africa's going to produce some groundbreaking legislation that's going to help lead the way.
Kwame,
go ahead.
Sorry, Shane, sorry to interrupt, but I think your point on social media and the legislation around it is incredibly valid, right? Because the legislation only came into play and started to be kind of more deeply investigated in some cases where it was almost too late and a significant amount of damage had been done. So I think that that's a space where we need to kind of be very clear around what are the responsibilities that we need to take for our usage of AI, and how do we make sure that we as individuals are taking that responsibility on.
Absolutely. Kwame, what's the current sort of government response to AI in Cote d'Ivoire, and is it affecting legislation in the region?
We've not seen any policy or legislative change around AI for now. We have a solid and comprehensive framework in place around personal data and access to data in general. There's and private intellectual property. Those are very well covered. So that means companies in Cote d'Ivoire, entities in Cote d'Ivoire cannot just release data in the public domain or train their AI tool with. But what he does say is that the gray area persists. I mean, everybody can do anything in the country. And if you look at the CIB takedown report from organizations like Facebook, you can really see all these coordinated operations using AI or generative AI in countries like Cote d'Ivoire or broadly in Francophone Africa. But see, the experience of technology over time has always shown that regulation has never been up to task. It's either self-regulation by the entities. Boeing is more afraid of losing customer than the FAA. And we saw that with the 737 MAX. The same applied to electricity, to uranium, and nuclear energy. So what I see in the future is more and more self-regulation, ethics in practices. So the PR industry would probably have something about AI. The technology industry would have to self-regulate. I know a lot of people are afraid when we mention self-regulation because there is the lack of government oversight. But like Mike was just putting, the government or the legislator or the parliament, they will never be as fast as the technology. We don't know what these organizations are cooking at the moment. When we talk about regulation, we're talking about what is publicly available now. We don't know what is in their laboratory, what they're thinking about, and even their guess on 10, 20 years, 30 years from now. If social media has taught us anything at all, is that government can only ban, close, shut down Facebook, shut down TikTok. They can't regulate. The only few occasions where we've seen effective regulation, it was internally done by the likes of Facebook and content moderation, etc., etc. But where does that put us African? Because those technologies are all from outside the continent at the moment. It means that government should rather be interested in developing homegrown solution as either alternative or our window into that world. Because right now, a US-based company have little or no oversight from an African government, and that's where the challenge is. So I do not see a way where the legislative environment would change profoundly as it is for social media. I am not sure social media is regulated. Rather than banning, the only thing we have in Cote d'Ivoire for social media is, for instance, if you have more than 30,000 followers, you need to register as a media with the government, so that if there is an issue, they know how to locate you. But that's all. But what if I am based in India, in Israel, in Japan, and I'm still feeding content in Cote d'Ivoire? The government is totally, can't possibly do anything to me, or at least in a limited way. So that's my view on regulation and legislation. It will take a lot of internal, both for us PR agencies. How do what are the check and balance we put in place when we use AI? When a content is generated, is there a vetting process internally? When we are on a continent where there are local languages, are we sure that what we generated in English and French and Arabic translate well in local languages, sound well, make sense culturally, etc., etc.?
I think the multi-jurisdictional issue is something that the whole world faces, but I'm fascinated to learn that having more than 30,000 followers means you have to register as a media agency or a media entity. That's incredible.
Yes.
Robert, could you tell us a little bit about the regulatory environment in Rwanda? And I know that there may not be direct legislation around AI yet, but I've noticed that there's quite a lot of policy that's coming out around tech and AI, especially in certain sectors. I see that there was an AI policy to drive economic growth. There's a healthcare policy around AI tools. And there's even a physical AI center that focuses very much specifically on developing homegrown tech innovation. Why do you think that Rwanda is embracing these tools and these policies so strongly?
Okay, so first of all, I think Mike and Kwame had already highlighted about the legislative environment, and it's the same for us because this is a wait and see game. And we are trying to play catch up with, these tech companies to see how far they have gone, and, trying to be on their heels and so on. So in Rwanda, it's not different as well. We still, a lot of governments, I'm sure, wherever they are trying to observe and see what kind of legislation will come, will be created, and maybe someone will have like a backbone somewhere where we can now attach some of the controls. But again, as we said, it's virtually impossible to control things that happen in the virtual world. So in terms of the AI policy, it's only recently, actually this year, when the cabinet approved the AI policy, and basically that meant that we have what we call now the National Artificial Intelligence Policy, which of course was led by the Ministry of ICT, and there's also the Rwanda Utilities and Regulatory Board Authority, and as well as other stakeholders in the industry, of course, from the public sector and the private sector, who are going to be the key drivers. And basically what they did is to kind of come up with 6 priority areas, which were identified to accelerate responsible development and deployment of AI. And again, as we said, this is about responsible. Just like Kwame had said, it could mean that there'll have to be instances where self-regulation will come to play, as opposed to, to the government. So the people who are behind this have to think, or have to give the advisory role to the government and say, okay, this is what we see in AI. These are the cracks. These are the areas where we can we can have challenges. And so we can, if in case we plan to do legislation, then it has to be around these kind of areas. So the 6 priority areas, if I would say, first of all, it was about reliable infrastructure and computer capacity. And basically what this means is that make tech available, make tech easy to access, and also make sure that people are able to differentiate or to stay away from misinformation in a way that it does not get out of hand. The other one will be 21st century skills and high AI literacy. Earlier on, I had said that we still lack the manpower in terms of the STEM. And in this case, we are looking at, having more people get into this sector and identifying which areas of, development of AI would, be very important for the country. We also have what we call the data strategy that would include even data privacy so that we do not have breaches and so on. Then the trustworthy AI in the public sector. So basically, this is promoting responsible deployment and, of course, using AI to give services back to the people. Most of the government services in Rwanda are now accessible online. You can do it from wherever you are, and the tools are there, of course, and the chat boxes are there. So in case you have any question, then it has to be instant. And because Rwanda wants to be a leader in ICT, then this for them is a priority. Then finally, of course, is to come up with the ethical guidelines, which will ensure that AI technologies, through the development and implementation, make sure that they are strictly ethical, and of course, there are no breaches that are encountered anywhere. So I would say we are still going through the policies and getting to understand what they mean and the impact that they will have in the industry and, of course, in the different sectors. And then as we continue to study them as well, we also need to keep in mind that we are playing, it's a catch-up game. So as much as we have the policies as well, we also need to stay abreast with what is happening in the AI world and to make sure that we are not left behind, or the policies that we create now do not become redundant in the next maybe 1 year or 5 years or so.
Thank you, Robert. I see that we're going a little over time, but I really want to get some of the questions from our audience. So I'd like to start our Q&A segment. We have had a few questions posted in the chat, so let me just get them quickly. All right, so this one does not appear to be directed at a particular panelist, so I think we can all weigh in on this. But what ethical considerations should PR and communications professionals in Africa take into account when deploying generative AI tools, especially in the context of cultural sensitivities, language diversity, and the potential for misinformation? So I think that's actually quite a few points we've already touched on, but anyone want to add to that?
Yes, I mean, we've already mentioned. I think the main issue is supervision. It's supervision. You can't just use the data from generated directly. You need to have people to vet that data, and to be able to vet, it has to be people who know. And I think AI, for generative AI, is a black box. You can't know the source. You can't know whose copyright you are infringing and all that. And I would say for now, it is first vet the data. Second, remain limited to generative text, essentially, just pulling together information and all that. As we've seen in academia, that sometimes AI can create fake reference. The vetting takes really precedence. I always say that transparency is key. You might want, if you want to use a ChatGPT or any generative AI, to let your stakeholder know. And by stakeholder, I mean both clients or colleagues, because you don't want them to find out that you've misled them. So really, disclosure, transparency is really key for me. But in terms of Africa, I think AI, generative AI self-disqualified when it comes to culturally sensitive content. Like Robert said, you can't generate Kenya, Rwanda. You can't. You just can't possibly generate a text in Kenya, Rwanda with Chat GPT or any tool. You can't generate an accurate depiction of Africa. I've seen some online. They may look beautiful for a Western audience, but any African who lives on the continent, no. So I think that part is really self-disqualifying itself. So I'm not really worried. What I'm worried about is rather written content, text, social media calendar, press releases, a plan and all that, and the kind of information they contain. So supervision, transparency to all the stakeholder, and really a background check.
Robert, Mike, anything you want to add on the ethical considerations that we should take as PR professionals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the key thing here, and I think Kwame made some really great points, and I think I mentioned it earlier around responsible usage. I think that is part of it. But I think even before you can consider using ChatGPT or one of these generative AI engines to kind of produce any piece of work or any piece of content, the most important thing to do is to actually understand how it is generated and how the technology works. Without understanding how it works and where all of that information comes from, all you're ending up with is the end product, without understanding all of the kind of tech that goes into making that for you. And that's where the risk is, right? If you don't know where it came from, there's no way for you to sense check it, proofread it, proof check it, check those data points are accurate, which is incredibly difficult. And that is where kind of the ethical and the legislative question starts to come in. So I think the first point is to really get on the inside track of how all of this technology works. Excuse me. And only once you understand how the technology works, you can start to understand how you should use it and whether you should use it. And then obviously apply kind of an ethical lens around where and how. And I fully agree, transparency is a key part of it.
Robert, anything you want to add?
So much has been said by the two gentlemen. What I would just add maybe is whenever we are generating content from AI, whichever platform that you use, personally, when I've tried to do that, actually I realize it's a lot of work because I spend more time trying to verify what I have already, got from the tools. So I would say, just like the gentleman have said, transparency is key. It should be just a guide per se of to show you the direction that you can follow, but it should not be like this is the direction that you're following. So basically for me, I would look at AI as a guide, just to give me the ideas, but should not be the final touch of the work that I do.
And just staying with you, Robert, I see there's a comment from someone else in the audience. They say, such a great point by Robert on language being a barrier for Rwanda. I wonder, is there not a fear then that the country might get left behind in terms of being included in the global digital revolution? African countries seem to always lag behind in global trends that play a pivotal role in the global economy.
Well, as we said, language, of course, has been a barrier, but I'm also very happy to announce that the government is doing a lot to make sure that we kind of use also the other languages like English and French in official communication. So I think it was early around 2008 when Rwanda adopted English as one of the official communication languages. And of course, this is a process that will continue, and it's being taught in schools from the kindergarten level, primary to secondary, and to the university. So we might not feel the effects today, but of course, we are raising a generation of people who are able to communicate in English. There's also another plan that I saw some time back where the government had come together with, they had partnered with an English training application or platform in UK, where, you know, a lot of students and a lot of people, especially in the hospitality and tourism sector, were being enrolled so that they can learn English, and they would get into this platform. They do a placement test, and eventually they will be placed based on their knowledge of English. And with this kind of opportunities that the government is availing to the, you know, to the people, to the citizens of Rwanda, then it means there is a lot of interest in making sure that apart from Kinyarwanda, which is the main language in Rwanda, people are able to understand English and, of course, speak French. And eventually, after some time, we are going to see a shift in terms of the communication that you're going to do. You're going to see a shift in the way people communicate. We have also seen some of the radio stations that have come, which are English. You know, they do English shows and so on, and some of them are doing really well. So this goes to show that the efforts that have been made before, they are now, you know, bearing fruit. So I would say we're on the right path, and we are heading there.
Thanks so much, Robert. I'm afraid that that's all the time we have for questions. And I just want to say thank you, everyone in the audience, for sending through your comments and your questions. And firstly, just want to say we've covered so much here today, and I want to thank our panelists for all of their incredible input. I will end off by saying that it's been an absolute privilege hearing from each of your unique perspectives on AI and legislation and sort of its future in Africa. And you three have given us so much to think about. And I hope it's given some of my colleagues a few ideas on how we can use AI responsibly. And just thank you all for your expertise and insight. For everyone in the audience today, for this session, thank you so much for logging on. I hope you've learned as much as I have. And we can't wait to see you again for the next edition of Edelman's AfriChats in the coming few months. Have a great day.